Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bill Legault of Salem Digest, and we are here with a new version of Salem Roundtable, which we will be calling the Salem Digest at the Roundtable. So it's a new version of an old show that I ran a few years ago, and I'm going to revive it and try to put half a dozen or more episodes in the bank to run through the winter. So today we are here with Mr. Marc Levy. You may know Marc from around town. He hangs out at the Gulu Gulu Cafe quite often. Marc has a very interesting story to tell, and I'm going to let him get into the details on that. But I think that just about everybody out there will find Marc's stories, Marc's writings, and Marc's experiences more than fascinating on multiple levels. So Marc, how are you? Thanks for coming by.
Thanks for having me here.
It's absolutely a pleasure. We've been running into each other at Gulu for a period of time now. Very quiet, Marc is. He sits over there. You never even know he's there unless he talks to you, which he doesn't do too often. So we're going to try to get Marc to talk a little bit today. We're just going to start really, really simple, Marc. But just let you introduce yourself and tell us a little something about your works here, which are contained in the book on the table, Medic in the Green Time.
So I'm from New Jersey originally, and I have spent some time in New York working there, social work. Left the country twice, once to live and travel in Central America, and the second time to live in New Zealand and travel in Southeast Asia. And before all that, I was an infantry medic in Vietnam with the 1st Cavalry Division in Vietnam and Cambodia in 1970. So the writing that I've done is based on my war and post-war experiences.
So what year was it when you entered into the military?
I enlisted in January of 1969.
That's a pretty important time to be entering military service as far as Vietnam goes.
Well, in one sense, yeah, because the anti-war movement was picking up, and that was, I think, in great part due to 68 and Tet and the clarity that Tet brought to the war, that the Americans were basically losing. So you make a good point, which is that the way to determine, in my opinion, somebody's combat experience in Vietnam was the year they were there, the unit they were with, and the area of operations they were in. So somebody who was there in, say, 68 in the Marines or the Army, they had especially if they were in the infantry, but not necessarily, they had a pretty bad year. Whereas when I got there at the tail end of 69, things had, by that time, quieted down. So my unit, 3 or 4 months before I got there, was known as Dying Delta. It was Delta Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, Custer's Unit, 1st Cavalry. So when I got there, they'd previously taken heavy losses, a lot of wounded, a lot of KIAs. But when I got there at the end of 69, things were quieting down. And for the first couple of months in 1970, a skirmish here, an ambush there, a rocket and mortar attack. When then came the Cambodia invasion of 1970, and we were there for about 46 days. It's like being in the wrong part of town, wrong neighborhood. So that's where I saw my action.
So in 1968, like you said, it was tumultuous times here, stateside, with the anti-war effort. That's the year that Cronkite came out basically saying that we were wasting our time over there, that we shouldn't be there. We were there for the wrong reasons, doing the wrong thing, and his words carried a lot of weight, but not as much weight as perhaps that they should have. So you got to Vietnam in 1969, but everything was pretty quiet until 70. Now, when you went through your training, how long was the medic training back then?
9 weeks, and informally referred to as Mickey Mouse.
Well, that was going to lead. I don't even need to ask this question, but I'll do it anyway, because I always ask anybody, being a guy that's been in the service and 2 services myself, I always ask, Was the training any good? When you got to wherever you needed to be to do your job, did you feel that you were prepared?
The basic training I took at Fort Dix, I took in the winter of '69. Always good for tropical weather.
Yes.
So, and it was primarily geared to World War II. Barbed wire and trenches and conventional war kind of stuff, and M14 rifles and target ranges. So very little training, if any, in relation to guerrilla warfare and who are the Viet Cong, what do they do, how do they operate, who are the NVA, what is the Ho Chi Minh Trail, what's a spider trap, what's a bunker complex, what's a horseshoe ambush, what's a U-shaped, none of that. Basic AIT, Advanced Infantry Training, Medic Training, Fort Sam Houston, 9 weeks, at least when I was there, primarily first aid, basic first aid, and watching films on the old time, 8mm film,
Yep.
or 16mm. And 3 days, right towards the end, with line of sight, point and shoot, which is pretty much what happened in Vietnam. But for the most part, it was, again, an extension of World War II. So that when I finally got to Vietnam and got to the front end of my unit, I spent a few days at headquarters. And they literally said to me, these other medics that had done their jungle tour and were back in the rear, forget everything you learned. Here's what you got to know. And they showed me, here's the creams that you're going to need, and here's the antibiotics you're going to need, and here's the topical ointments you're going to need, and here's some morphine syrettes, and here's the anti-malaria pills, and here's a whole bunch of 2x2 cotton bandages for the wounds, and get some ammo, get some grenades, and we'll get the armor to give you an M16. And
Which you hadn't fired yet.
Towards the end of basic training, yes, M16.
Okay, all right.
So the first, I remember on my first patrol, and by then I had 16 frags, hadn't got a 45 yet, but I got one of those, and then a bunch of medical supplies. So I'm weighted down with about, let's say, 50 pounds. Medics didn't carry machine gun ammunition or claymore mines. So we go down this patrol, and all I could think of was, I want to go home. I can't handle this. And this was the first time in my life I didn't have a choice. And so that was the beginning of 8 months in the jungle.
It's interesting how common sense often kicks in just after it should have. So you find yourself, you volunteered?
I did.
You volunteered, and you volunteered as a medic. That was your choice?
It's my choice. Basically, I wanted to get out of a lousy home situation, so the Army took me.
So you heard, when you got to Vietnam, to the forward part of your unit, you heard the same words that just about everybody in the history of the American military has heard when that happens. Forget everything that they've taught you. You're going to have to start from scratch here. That's not just in wartime, that's virtually in peacetime, anywhere you go. Did you carry a weapon at all when you were?
I did. I carried M16 and 3 bandoliers of ammo. And I have some photographs. And there's a friend of mine, we're on patrol, and I turned to my friend, I gave him my camera, and I said, take a picture. So he took one, and I'm just standing there like this. And right after that picture was taken, it's a good grunt shot. It could have been anybody in the platoon. It was me. And right after that, everybody dropped down because we thought we had movement, meaning we thought we heard the enemy.
Right.
But we were okay. A couple of, let's say 2 or 3 months after I got to the company, we spent a few days in the rear. And some guy with a rear job, we started talking, and he said, what do you do? I'm a medic. Would you want a 45? Sure. And we walked into this little alley, and he gave me a chrome-plated 45.
Nice.
Yeah, which I carried for about 5 months.
Easier to carry than an M16.
No, I carried the 45. Oh, yeah.
Well, you hear about some medics that choose not to carry a weapon.
I didn't need any of
they're
those.
supposed to. So.
Every medic I ever met, at least an M16. One guy, I don't know where he got it, but he carried a grease gun.
Nice.
World War II grease gun.
See, he had some quick firepower there if you needed it. So you've put a lot of your experiences, if not all of your experiences at this point, in print. You're online. We will share later the website, Medic in the Green Time. It's a nice website that I think everybody should look at. You're in Vietnam now. You're meeting a lot of people that you've never met before, and you don't know at first how much you're going to have to come to depend on some of those people. You're sitting around for 2 months. When did you start to realize that some activity was going to be occurring soon?
Well, you're talking enemy contact stuff?
Yeah.
I don't know, let's say that, the first couple of weeks, I have dim recollection at this point of that early time, but beautiful, pristine jungle. And just awed by the beauty of the jungle, the light, the jungle sounds, the smells, and then kind of hard to get used to the daily grind. But when we made, I have a recollection of an initial ambush, and it was a cakewalk. The platoon was out. My platoon was, let's say, 100 yards that way, and another platoon was 100 yards to our, say, south. And they had set up an ambush, and 3 NVA just walked right into it, daylight. So they just blew their legs off of claymores, and then just started opening up on them. And then they called us for backup, which they didn't need. And by the time we got there, these 3 guys that were just getting hammered. They're screaming, and the GIs were just picking them off like fish in a barrel. And this is my first time, I'm pretty sure. And I remember getting down on one knee, and I was maybe 20 yards from where, was all the shooting taking place, and I'm on the left of it. And I cried. And I remember thinking, how can anybody do this? How can anybody be so inhuman? Yeah. And then they killed they killed them. And then they scavenged the bodies. And I was just not ready for this. And it's the first time I'd seen people. They're just bullet holes, flecks in the uniforms, and little purple spots on their heads where they got hit. And then the guys reaching for, souvenirs, watches, belts, especially the belt buckle, money, and photographs. And that was the first time. The point being that none of us got hit. And about, let's say, 3 months later, after I'd seen a little more action, I changed. We ambushed some people, and then after we scavenged and that thing, we're walking past the bodies, and one NVA guy jumped up. He was playing dead, and I walked right past him, and he surrendered. And I was just so angry. Why didn't they shoot him? I had completely changed, because I'd seen enough of my guys get wounded, you start to build up all this tension. Unconsciously you realize you're being hunted. We're hunting them, they're hunting us. So there's a pattern to it that over time sort of infiltrates and inhabits you. There's this rhythm of we walk into them, or they walk into us, or we walk into each other, or they ambush us, or we ambush them. And finally there's this release. And it's just this tremendous release when it finally happens, whatever it is. And then there's this slowly, that release and that feeling of relative calm gives away, and then it starts all over again.
Well, I've heard it said, and I agree and disagree with it, that exposure to warfare causes one to lose their humanity. And I think there's a point to that, but I also think that in reality that's not true, because what it does is it reveals the basic, the most basic instinct in humanity, which is survival. And in order to survive in that environment, you have to lose some of the finer things, or you're not going to be able to operate, you're not going to be able to function.
I was thinking about this the other day. There's a chapter in the book called War Jokes Wanted. I had this idea that I shared with a guy that I met on Counterpunch. It's a website, a left-oriented website, good for news, good for pretty much informed political opinion and anecdotal stuff. So I met this guy who wrote a great column on what the Americans did to the American Indians, Native Americans. And he was a heavy combat Vietnam vet. He was with the AmeriCal. He was at My Lai.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we got to know each other, and his name was Tony Swindell. I said, Tony, I got an idea for a book. We query people. We put out a call for submissions. We want war jokes. We don't want Reader's Digest, humor in uniform, G-rated. We want war jokes. We want grim, grisly, dark, black humor, gallows humor, the stuff that you could only imagine, dream up, experience, laugh at if you've been in combat.
Something that would horrify somebody who's never been in that situation.
Exactly.
It's the truth. It's the God's honest truth. Yeah.
So we got about, and we put out an ad in a paper, put out an ad on a couple of veterans' websites, put out an ad on my website, and got about, let's say, a half dozen, maybe a dozen responses. We had assumed there would be like hundreds, maybe a dozen. And half of those were exactly what we didn't want. Cute, ha ha, no thank you. Politely put, no thank you. One guy got the gag. I mean, there were a couple of ones we took, but one guy was a Marine officer. And I read that joke and I laughed out loud, and it was just gruesome from the get-go. And I thought about relating it, and then I thought, no, I think we'll just buy the book. It perfectly epitomizes what you're talking about, or at least one dimension of what you're talking about, which is that there are some people who adapt and survive war or other calamitous situations by finding a form of humor in it.
Yes.
This guy's humor was so macabre. Only combat vets could feel safe in laughing at it.
But appropriate for the arena. Like I said, I don't think you lose your humanity. I think you take parts of your humanity and put them on the back of the head and lock them up for a while, because you won't survive.
Yeah.
You won't survive. Emotionally, you won't survive. The unfortunate part of that is down the road, you're going to pay for that. I think that's probably where a lot of the PTSD comes from, is the fact that you put that stuff away and you operate on just that survival instinct. So I look at some of your writings and you talk about individual people. And you can tell, and you just come right out and say it. I liked this guy. I didn't like that guy. Here's why I didn't like this guy. And I just early on one story, you're talking about this soldier who was a machine gunner and would drag his ammo behind him as you guys were advancing. And of course, the whole objective, especially in jungle warfare, is to move quietly. So, were you surprised to see that sort of thing when you started to go out? Some people that basically checked out and didn't care. Did that provoke anger in people?
Yeah, that was Brother Al. And Brother Al was, he was a black soldier, and he was one of the more militant black soldiers, because it was an unpopular war, especially with black soldiers.
Right.
So, black soldiers in Vietnam refer to themselves as soul brothers, and at least in the rear and as well in the jungle, black soldiers would wear these little black wristlets that they made from black shoelaces that everybody had, and they'd weave black crosses and wear them around their necks, and they refer to themselves as like Brother Jones, Brother Smith, Brother Johnson, and they had their own little fist thing, this little thing called the DAP. And at least in my unit, everyone got along pretty well. But Brother Al was militant and angry, and he acted out by dragging the machine gun ammo, which was in a little Claymore bag, behind him on patrol, and just saying, I don't, just complaining about the war. And nobody liked it, because you can't do that. You can't put everybody in jail. It was just, in one sense he was right? And on the other hand, you don't jeopardize the whole platoon because of your ideology.
His social commentary was accurate.
There was another guy.
Practical application was not.
There was on the other hand, the perfect opposite. There was a white guy. I might have been a college graduate. He just had the air, he just had this like bourgeois quality about him. He didn't belong in the infantry. So one day we're on this patrol in this really pristine part of this Song Bay province. And he just said, that's it. I'm not going on any more patrols. I quit. I just quit. And the response, so it was like this gentleman's enunciation. It's the opposite of acting out. It was just making this polite statement, So the platoon's response was to say, great, good, see you around. And we left him. And of course, he scurried along, and that was that.
Yeah.
But there were kind of notorious events in the rear where black soldiers opened up and killed some people, shot some people.
Yeah, there was a lot of that.
I didn't see it. I heard about it.
There was fragging, of course. It was a time in the military history of this country where they were in too much of a rush to produce leaders. Brought in a lot of officers that probably shouldn't have been officers, shouldn't have been in leadership positions, and obviously they were unable to control some of that, which I think was you probably had similar situations in every war ever fought. It's not unique to Vietnam, but I think it was out in the open more in Vietnam, and maybe more people doing it. I don't know. Did you? As time went on, these guys did they eventually come around? Do some of them stay that way? When you go out into the field, you're dragging your ammo behind you. If there's a firefight, is he doing his job?
He was transferred out.
Yeah.
And that happened, I think, a lot over the course of the war, where you had soldiers, on the other hand, who were unfit for combat in the first place. They should have never been inducted. But because McNamara instituted this program in the late 60s, which became known as McNamara's Follies, you had around something like 300,000 guys who were drafted to up the manpower because there was a shortage of guys because of the growing protests against the war. So we had a couple of those guys in my platoon. The standards were lowered to the extent that guys got in who were illiterate, or they had physical deformities, or the lower IQs, or criminal records, or health conditions, and they were just sort of covertly waived. So for my replacement, I believe, was one of those guys. One of the guys in my platoon who I really liked was one of those guys. He got killed. It's sort of one of the dark spots in the war that isn't that well known. A friend of mine wrote a book about it called McNamara's Follies.
I've not read McNamara's Follies, but I'm very familiar with McNamara. Very controversial at the time, even more controversial as time goes on. If McNamara had never come along, you might have never gotten into the situation that you were in. I truly believe that. And stuff that I have read have basically said that Lieutenant Calley from Ely really was one of those officers. Prior times in the service, he wouldn't even have qualified to come into the military at all, never mind as somebody wearing a lieutenant's bars. So as I look at your writing, as I go through it, it seems to me that you're still serving not the country, not the Army. It just seems to me that you're still serving your comrades somewhat by getting the story out there. Do you feel that way, or is that just my perception of what you're doing?
I'm aware of it, that there's a part of me that strongly identifies still with the war, which I'm still learning to this day is not uncommon. And I had this experience in 1998. It's in the book, where I met a Vietnamese writer named Bao Ninh. So Bao Ninh was in the North Vietnamese Army for 7 years.
And where did you meet him?
I met him at the William Joyner Center in Boston, at a writers' conference. And I had read his book when I was living in New Zealand, and he wrote about the war from the point of view of a soldier who was caught up in the war, and at the same time he was in love with this woman. So that's this war love story, and it's still in print, sold millions of copies. It's one of the great novels of what the Vietnamese called the American War. And I would read the book and I would go into a trance, and I felt like I was floating off my bed. I didn't know what was going on. That was 1994. And I traveled for about a year, or 8 months. I got back to the States in roughly the right end of 95. I bought the book again in 96, saw his picture on the back, and immediately, and that night had a nightmare, because it looked like every NVA soldier we ever killed. And then I met some people in New York who were able to put me in touch with him. So I wrote to him. I was living in Tarrytown, New York. And 2 months later, I got a letter from Hanoi. It was a Christmas card, right? And he wished me Merry Christmas, which is really, I still have the card. So then you fast forward roughly two and a half years. I go to this writers' conference, which I heard about by chance. There's about 150 people in this big auditorium for the first day orientation. And speakers are being introduced. One speaker, then another. These are going to be the future faculty for the workshop. And then I see these 5 little Vietnamese guys off on the side waiting to go up. And they're walking in single file, waiting to get called up to the podium. And there's Bao Ninh. I couldn't believe it. And so each one of them talked through an interpreter. And then they turned around and they started leaving, single file. And right before he left, there were like 10 people on either side of me sitting. I had to jump over all these people to my right, scramble past them, get into the corridor, and just before Bao Ninh walked out, I called his name. It's Bao Ninh. And he turned around and he looked at me, and I said, it's me. It's Marc Levy. And he said, Marc Levy, right? And we rushed to each other like that. And here's this guy, he's like 5'6". He might have weighed 130 pounds. Wiry, it's all muscle, right? He's wearing sandals and there's like little flimsy polyester pants and this polyester shirt. He picks me up, 150 pounds, picks me up, puts me down, and claps me on the back like I'm a bell, like 3 times. And I just started crying. And I couldn't control the crying. And then a woman named Lady Borton, who's an author and an American who lived in Vietnam during the war as a nurse, tended to the wounds of both sides. She came over and translated after I had calmed down, after Bao Ninh said in sign language, sit down. So then we met again the next day and we talked for 3 hours. And what I realized kind of after that, the point of the story being that I had all this grief and loss inside me. And in that meeting, it all came out. And it's not over, but that was a genuine, authentic turning point.
You've never gone back over there?
Oh, I went back a couple more times to their writers' conferences. And that was the only time I believe he was there.
No, I mean to Vietnam?
I'm sorry, I went back to Vietnam in 94.
Oh, before that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I made a point, I could have looked for him, but I didn't have the nerve. So I had other experiences in Vietnam and other parts of Asia. I backpacked for 8 months. Say 2 months in Vietnam, a month in Laos, a month in Cambodia.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And transited through Malaysia and Singapore, and went back to where I fought. But it's all in the book. I
Right.
had amazing adventures, amazing travel adventures. But it was a combination of adventure and, if not flashback, just enough reliving that I was thrown off.
Now, you brought up Laos and Cambodia. Let's go back to when you were serving over there, when you guys went into Cambodia. Did you know you were going into Cambodia? Did they tell you that, or were you just heading east?
I'm sure the
heading
office.
west?
Well, I think the officers may have known. They didn't say anything. We come off this long patrol.
Right.
Let's say 2 weeks.
Were you traveling at brigade level, division
That's
level?
company.
Strictly company level.
Yeah. So we're in this big area called a million shipper, where it means a million helicopters could come in, figuratively. And the where we had just left, we had spent the night, the CP, the command, where the whole company stayed, that was on fire. We burned it. But it turns out the fire spread, so the whole million shipper where we were was starting, it was on fire.
You lit the forest on fire.
I had to get
the
out of
jungle
there.
on fire.
So I was having a rough time. I wanted to get out of the platoon. I didn't know if I could hack it any longer. And long story short, we're getting ready to go on the choppers, and then the word comes down, we're going, we fly back from wherever we were in Tay Ninh to Quan Loy, this huge base, thinking, well, we're going to have a week off to pull guard somewhere. And we get orders, we're going to Cambodia. And there's all these other choppers in this long line down this airstrip, which I found in '94. And it gone, pretty much. And there's all these supplies, and there's water, sea rations, ammo, and the order is get ammo, get sea rations, get water, get on a helicopter, we're going to Cambodia.
They've been planning your next adventure for quite a while. So you were operating at company level. There were other companies also. Just for people out there that aren't quite familiar, how many people were in your company at the time?
So there are, roughly speaking, 20 guys in a platoon, and each platoon had 2 or 3 squads, and there were generally 4 platoons in a company, plus another command platoon.
Right.
So roughly speaking, 100 to 120 guys in a company.
So not a full-strength company, though, at 120. Was that full strength
That's
at the
full
time?
strength, yeah.
Okay. 120 guys. Really not that many people.
Well, here's how it worked. My platoon, 3rd platoon, and I have a photo of it, which we'll show later, of my platoon waiting to go out on some patrol somewhere. We went in with 20 guys in Cambodia, and we left with 7. Yeah, but we were lucky because most of those guys were wounded. In Vietnam, in 67, 68, 65, basically before 69, pitched battles, mass casualties.
Right.
I didn't see that. You had 25, 30 guys getting killed at a time. You had platoons, companies getting wiped out or pretty much wiped out. I just didn't see that. So I sent away 20 years ago or so for the unit history of my battalion. So over the course of the year I was there, we took something like 257 casualties, mostly wounded. A couple of dozen KIA and 1 MIA.
So the numbers were down, the engagements were smaller. So when you deploy as your company into Cambodia, your company or your platoon, basically, that's your world. That little bit that you see, that's your world. You don't see the big picture. You only see that little picture in front of you.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Did you guys have any idea what you were heading into? Did they, I mean, they give you the briefing before you go out there. They don't necessarily tell you where you go. Were you expecting to have any sort of serious contact?
We all had fear. And the way it worked, we went on what's called a 20-bird CA. Usually when we go on a mission, on a patrol, we were just ordinary grunts. We were not special forces. We were not rangers. They have a totally different way of flying into an operation. Didn't have that. We'd get on the noisy chopper, make a noisy landing, and then try to disappear into the jungle.
It's hard to do when they hear you coming.
And they hear you coming.
Yeah.
So we went, usually we'd fly in, and there might be 5 birds, 5 helicopters at a time coming in. In Cambodia, 20 helicopters at once, huge. It's like a big long line. And circling around us were these Cobra gunships, so close you could see the pilots. And it might have been like a 20-minute, half-hour flight. And we're all scared. And as we started to descend into what we saw was this enormous field, which turned out to be an abandoned NVA base camp, the Cobra gunships started to peel off from the circle and power dive in, and releasing their rockets and their miniguns and their 40 Mike grenades. And at the same time, the Special Forces base camp called Bodop started dropping 175 and 155 artillery shells. So you hear them streaking through the air and then careening down and then crash, boom, and then fountains of dirt and flame up into the air, columns of it. So you've got rockets, miniguns, artillery dropping down, this boom, boom, boom of the 40 millimeter grenade launchers. And then as we start to come in at a low altitude, the door gunners open up, shooting, their 60 machine guns into the jungle. And then within, a couple of feet, we jump off and we just ran a couple of yards and then drop down, right? We're in the enemy's backyard. It's getting, it might have been like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This is in the book. It's a great read. 2 platoons went out on patrol. One went this way, one went this way. Bad commo, bad leadership. They walk into each other, they open up. Fortunately, the only person that got hit was a guy in my platoon. I wasn't on that patrol. He's walking out of the jungle because they finally realized it was called an all-American,
yeah.
2 Americans units shooting at each other. So he got shot in the wrist. And he was one of these guys that shouldn't have been in the Army. He just should have never been in. And he was from Tennessee. And he's walking out. His name was Leon Gunther. Nice guy. And he's holding up his hand like this, and he says, "Doc, I've been shot." And I walked up to him, and I said, "Yeah, okay." I patched him up, and that was the end of his. It was called $1 million wound.
Right, too. Yeah, that's a heck of a spot.
He gets it. He's out. That was his ticket home.
So how long were you guys there?
46 days.
46 days. That's a long time.
Long time, and probably the last day we were followed, because on the last day, and this is in the book, we were told that there was a North Vietnamese special forces following us because they had red berets, whatever that meant. So it was 2-man guard. Just imagine this big circle, maybe 50 meters in diameter. And that's where everybody was like circling the wagons.
Yep.
That's us. And all around the perimeter, there's claymore mines, and a little farther out, there's trip flares, and within it, there's us. Instead of one guy on guard duty every, say, 20 meters or so, there's 2 guys. They wanted 2 guys up, and everybody stayed up for an hour or whatever. So that night I went to sleep. This is after we'd been there for, almost a month and a half, and seen been in action basically every other day. Some kind of firefight, some kind of contact. And we're all shocked out. We're just shocked out.
How did you sleep during all of that?
Well,
Fitfully.
Actually, you're so tired. You'd sleep for 2 hours, and then you'd have to pull guard duty 2 hours. But that night, I slept with my ammo on, and my 45, and my M16 over here, and I had this nightmare. And I'm sleeping this way, here's my head, and my friend Jerry is sleeping here, and there's his head. They're sleeping head to toe.
Yep.
Maybe 4 feet apart. And I'm in the nightmare. The NVA have gotten past the perimeter, and they're crawling towards me. And they're going to go past me into the center of the company. So I wake up. I wake up out of this nightmare, and I see these feet, because I look over here, or wherever Jerry's feet are, they're here, because my head is here. I see these feet, right? And I take out my 45, for real. I pulled the hammer back, and I pointed it at these feet, right? And just then, and this is in the book, the moon comes out, right? From behind these clouds. And I see the treads on the boot. They're American treads. Oh, that's not the enemy, that's Jerry. So I point the pistol back up, and I squeeze the hammer. I pull the trigger, lower the hammer to place, put the pistol back in my holster, and I lean back, and I don't know if I went back to sleep, but finally day came, and I didn't say anything. And then we thought we were going to fly back to Vietnam, but we walked back. We just walked another 1.5 miles, or whatever it was, through this mud, up this long muddy. This hill was so muddy and so slippery, it was hard to actually, people kept climbing up and falling. Finally we get past that, we get to this half-built fire base. And another month or 2 later, I was out of the infantry. 25 or so years ago, I found Jerry through the internet, called him up, we talked, and I told him that story. And his response was, "Gee, Doc," all medics are called Doc, "I'm glad you didn't shoot. It would have put a dent in my golf game."
No doubt. Absolutely.
No doubt.
I wouldn't have been surprised if he would have said he wished you had shot him, just so he could get out of there. But
Jerry Beak was a man's man, a great squad leader. I have some pictures of him. I mean, you can just tell this guy, sort of I think he was Polish, the Polish version of Rocky and Sylvester. I mean, this guy, he just emanated leadership.
Well, I've talked to a lot of people over the years that have been in some combat here in Vietnam at one level or another, including some helicopter pilots that were friends with my cousin, who was an Army aviator. And this one guy, Larry Todd, always said, when you're back at the base camp, there's lots of posers, there's lots of people with secrets, there are a lot of people that are pretending to be what they're not. But once you get into the shit, as they say, that stops. You know who's who at that point, because you just have to. So you guys spent 46 days in combat. You're in touch with some of these guys, obviously, all these years later.
There's a chapter in the book called Overrun in Cambodia. And I got in touch with a bunch of guys over the years who were in Bravo Company in the 1st of the 7th Battalions, a sister company. And for whatever reason, I was able to, there were more of those guys who were on the internet than Delta Company. I don't know why. I met a couple of guys from Delta over the years, but many more on the internet, Bravo. And I put out a call for everybody who survived LZ Ranch in Cambodia. It was that's the base we flew into. From there, we'd go out on a patrol, then we'd come back. So go out for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, come back, spend a week around the perimeter pulling guard, menial duties in the day, go back out in the jungle a week later. So around, I I'm pretty sure it was, is it in May? I think it was June 16th. LZ Ranch was overrun. And that meant that around 2 o'clock in the morning, probably 20 NVA sappers, these guys are specially trained to crawl through barbed wire, which they really can do,
Right.
very slowly. They got through the barbed wire, and it's a really primitive fire base. I mean, it was primitive. Just bunkers, sandbags, a couple of artillery cannons, mess tent, communications tent, an aid station. Really primitive. And then one side of the perimeter, one section of it was way too close to the jungle. And that's where they came in. The jungle was like 50 yards away.
They'll find that spot every time.
Well, if it had been a well-planned base, it wouldn't have happened like that. The commander who designed the base was relieved of his command afterward. But they got in and wreaked havoc. So I put out a call to all these guys who had gotten to know me. I said, I'm writing this book. I have this website. If you were on that base, what was your experience? A couple of Bravo guys were there. A couple of Delta guys wrote to me. A couple of other guys, a lot of the artillery guys who I got to know through Bravo, they wrote to me. So there are these great first-hand accounts that, of these guys who were there. It sort of fills in just the words, well, I was on this fire base and it was overrun. And each of these guys has a unique, distinct voice, a unique, distinct experience. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, this is just oral history gold. I had to beg some of these guys, come on, write it down and send it to me, because they talk about it in an email, and I said, no, tell me the whole story.
It's important.
Yeah. And then a couple of guys, I said, you got any photographs? Well, yeah, but they're packed away. Oh, come on, man.
Find them.
So a couple of guys did, and they're just beautiful, precious, living legacies of that experience. And for these guys just wanted to put it behind them, understandably so. But when I saw a couple of these photographs, I mean, it just hairs on the back of my neck stood up.
So you've got poems on your website. Are they in the book also?
Yeah, there's about a dozen poems. And I have to say that one of the poets, Richard Levy, he is a noted, he is up there. He is a great American poet. So he writes about nature because he has a place out in upstate New York, but he lives in Brooklyn. But he's written some of the great war poetry. Who are the great war poets? Yusuf Komunyakaa, Doug Anderson, Bruce Weigel, Michael Casey. Some people would say George Evans. I don't know.
Okay.
And I'm probably leaving out some names, but those are the guys that come to mind. And Doug Anderson. And so Richard's poems are extraordinary, as are the poems of Dave Connolly. Dave was in the 11th Armored Cav. He's been interviewed and written various articles and been showcased, and he's in a documentary. His poetry, in my opinion, jumps off the page. It's just extraordinary work.
So that's a section of the book.
Yeah.
You can also access that on the website.
Yeah.
And then you have a section on the website for submissions. You were looking for war jokes. I don't know if you still are.
You know, the submissions section has been up for years. Very few people write.
Well, I'm going to ask about one which I put on the questions when I sent to you, because I'm probably going to be the first one to respond to that. We're coming into modern times now. You're a Vietnam veteran. I'm what they call a Cold Warrior, kind of a silly term, but that was the era that I served. And over the last few years, geez, I don't even know how many years, it's this thank you for your service thing has become very common. And I didn't quite know what to make of it when it first started. and after a while it just seems to roll off the tongue so easily now that I don't detect frequently a lot of sincerity in it. It's just kind of a throwaway line. Initially, I wasn't uncomfortable with it. I didn't know what to make of it. Like, how do you respond to that? You're welcome? Nobody says you're welcome anymore anyway. When you say thank you to somebody, they say thank you back. And over the last few years, I've come to not really think too much of it because I don't think people really mean it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I put out a call for submissions, and a friend of mine gave it a name. He called it, because it's thank you for your service, he said, well, he just rolled off this phrase, 5 simple words. I said, that's it. I'll take it. So I put out a call, and a lot of the same guys, Bravo company and some Delta company, and then some people I didn't know, they just saw it. So I got about 35 submissions, and they're all great. One guy from Eli, he wrote like 3.5, 4 pages. Yeah? He just opened up. There was a pattern to the variety of responses. So a number of guys were just okay with it. They kind of knew what you're saying. It's like, yeah, okay.
It's an attempt.
Yeah. It's inauthentic. It's insincere. It's a conventional thing to do on a holiday. And after that, that's it. You don't mean it, but I'll pretend you do, and you'll pretend likewise, and we'll call it a day. And some guys are okay with that. Or they'll say, I just water off a duck's back, I let it go. And other guys would say, I appreciate that. I fought for my country, and when someone recognizes me for that, I appreciate that. I think they're sincere, and I reflect it back. And a couple of guys, the guy from Eli, bitter, just embittered. And a couple of guys, myself in that category, uncomfortable, and expressing emotional uncomfort. And here's the reason. Here's the logical reason behind the emotional discomfort. And I'll illustrate it this way. I was sitting in a little meeting about 4 years ago in South Hamilton. I'm going to do a show for this little program called Pathways for Patriots, which is kind of affiliated with the Patton estate. So I'm sitting next to this woman. We're all going to be in this panel, and we're just kind of prepping. And she turned to me and she said, and she had lost her brother in Vietnam. So we're roughly the same age. And she said, I just want to thank you for your service. And I just instinctively said, I wish you hadn't said that. And she looked at me like I was strange. And I said, what do you mean? And I said, well, and I believe I explained to her. I said, you don't know, when you say that to a vet, this is what I wrote in my response in the book, you don't know what I did.
Correct.
You don't know what I didn't do. You don't know if I was, if the vet was competent in combat, or if he ran, or if he feels guilt, if he has survivor's guilt because he lived and his buddies died. You don't know if he was in combat. Maybe he was in the rear. Maybe he was involved in the black market. Maybe he just worked in an air-conditioned office all day. You don't know if he shot somebody by mistake. You don't know if he tried to frag somebody. I knew someone who did. You don't know if he killed women and children. You don't know if he killed anybody. You don't know if he feels bad about killing people. You don't know if what he's did since he's come back. You don't know if he has PTSD, if he has anger, if he has crying spells, if he feels suicidal, if he has depression, if he has anxiety, if he hangs out by himself all the time, if he can't get along with people. You don't know how many jobs he's had or lost or kept. It is not a good thing.
You don't know what you're dredging up.
Yeah. So I try to soften that by saying, so what do you say? What do you say to somebody?
I've come down to, I just say either you're welcome, because nobody uses that anymore, or I just say I appreciate it. It's really what it comes down to, because total strangers will do it. I'll occasionally wear something. I got an Army PT coat jacket, not the type that we didn't have that kind of stuff when I was in. We wore these ugly yellow sweats, and somebody will usually say that, and I just say I appreciate it. That's all I can do. So we've taken up a little bit of time here. This has gone fairly quickly, Mark. I'm going to ask you one question, and then we're going to let you push your the website and tell people where they can get your book.
Okay.
And we'll put all that information on the credits afterwards. So, a word that gets thrown around a whole lot by a lot of people, and all reality means many different things to people, is patriot. Are you an American patriot? Are you not an American patriot? Do you consider yourself an American patriot?
In the popular sense, no.
Do you consider yourself an American patriot in your sense?
I believe that it's right to stand up for the truth and not hide the facts, and to be able to express your opinion about the facts, or an informed opinion that's informed by the facts, without having to fear that you're being un-American. It is American to be able to say, you know what? The United States has invaded 50 countries in the last 100 years. And the United States has a policy of going in, not for humanitarian interest, but for its own imperial self-interest. We invaded Nicaragua. We invaded Guatemala. We invaded Honduras.
Panama.
Yeah. Why? For the resources. Who do I believe is a great American patriot? Smedley Butler, Marine Corps General.
I know the name.
Not one, 2 medals of honor. He was involved initially with the invasions of
all the Central American countries. Yeah.
Came out with left the Marines, toured the country in the 30s. His most famous speech being, "War is a racket."
He spoke out against imperialism. That was in the 30s. That's a name, boys and girls, to Google if you're not familiar with General Smedley Butler. Well, in my opinion, you are a patriot. But, you know, there are people that are also out there that are patriots that have other points of view, even people that were in Vietnam. I don't think you have to fit into a narrow view to be an American patriot. I think the problem in our country today is a lot of different people that consider themselves patriots can't sit down and talk to each other rationally. And I think that works like this contribute toward a rational discussion. People that have had these experiences, that have been formed one way or the other by these experiences, like you and the people that help contribute to your book, are putting their thoughts down for other people to see. That, what you're doing here is a patriotic act, in my humble opinion, for what that's worth. And I appreciate that. Where can we get your book?
Okay, so the book is available on my website, and it's available on Amazon.
So on www.Medic in the Green Time, and on Amazon, and we'll put all that information up. And you also have a fairly new Facebook page now, and we'll put the Facebook link up there for people too. So that's it, guys. Marc, thank you very much. You're a great conversationalist. I didn't really have to do anything.
Good to
I
be
just sat here and nodded my head a lot, and I appreciate you being here. Salem Access TV appreciates you being here, and we wish you the best of luck as things move on. So that's it. That's it, guys. We're signing off. Sorry that I didn't groom my beard better. Wearing these things makes it tough.